This safe contains evidence of the code Ian Brady used to record where he buried the victims of the Moors murders. Undercover detectives from Greater Manchester Police have come to see whether it can help them finally close the case. In 1966, Ian Brady and Myra Hindley were sentenced to life after police found the body of 17-year-old Edward Evans at their house in Manchester. 2 other victims were found on Saddleworth Moor: a 10-year-old girl called Leslie Ann Downey and a 12-year-old boy called John Kilbride. It was to be another 20 years before the body of 16-year-old Pauline Reed was recovered. 12-year-old Keith Bennett has never been found. Ian Brady's psychiatrist says the location of this grave is a secret the Moors murderer will never surrender.
I know, you don't know, you want to know, and I'm not going to tell you.
It's Myra. All I want to say to you is that I've gotten the letter, thank you very much, and the envelopes, and I'll be starting the next episode later on today and get them off to you early in the week.
I first spoke to Myra Hindley in 1998, when I asked her to write an account of her role in the Moors murders for a BBC documentary. I began examining the case because her legal challenge to the ruling that she should die behind bars had reached the Court of Appeal. The 150,000 words she wrote to me stand as the only first-hand account of the Moors murders. After the film went out, I agreed with Keith Bennett's family to continue to question her about where he was buried. It took months of persuasion before she agreed to help. She told me that while the other children were buried on the exposed wasteland of Hollin Brown Knoll, Keith Bennett was driven to a lay-by at the head of Hoe Grain Stream. From there, he'd been walked onto the moor, strangled, and buried in a peat gully on the banks of Shiny Brook. She sent me a detailed series of maps, which have been used by forensic archaeologists, Professor John Hunter and retired Detective Chief Superintendent Barry Simpson, to narrow down the search area. But Myra Hindley's efforts to persuade people that she was reformed and should be freed failed.
The Moors murderer Myra Hindley has died at the age of 60 in hospital in Suffolk. She was given the last rites yesterday. We're told that she died at 16:58 after respiratory failure. Her next of kin have been informed, and there'll be a coroner's inquest.
The death of Myra Hindley was celebrated in the national press, but Keith Bennett's family worried that the chance of finding his body may have died with her. His younger brother has spent decades searching for him.
It's like another door closed. And that's why the police officer, at my home here, and he sort of cast it aside and she's dying, so now we'd exhausted that avenue anyway, as a sort of thing. So I said, well, not really. I don't think we exhausted that avenue at all. You know what I mean? If you expected me to jump for joy that she's dying, you know what? I'm not, you know what I mean? It's, because while she's alive, we've got a chance, you know. I mean, whatever now she's dead, whatever memory she had that we were trying to get at, she took with her.
But soon after Myra Hindley's funeral, I was given a large collection of her personal papers. They had lain unread in secret storage for years. There was a box in which I found her autobiography. It was never published because her supporters judged it damaging to her cause. There were more than a quarter of a century of letters Myra Hindley had written to her mother from prison. There were also nearly 200 photographs chronicling Ian Brady and Myra Hindley's relationship during the murders. Ian Brady believed these had been destroyed. The box contained everything from the insurance documents for the car she and Ian Brady used to abduct children to the gift he gave her on her 21st birthday. I let Greater Manchester Police and Alan Bennett know what I had.
It gives you something else to work on. You know, far from that avenue being closed, even though she's dead now. I mean, there's more stuff now than we've ever had before to work on, which is, you know, what we hope to do.
That's something that's got to be worked through.
Yeah, it's by everybody, you know what I mean, including the police.
It took months to read and catalogue the unpublished autobiography, the letters to her mother, and all the new photographs. However, I was conscious that I might miss something. So I asked Ian Brady's former psychiatrist, Professor Malcolm McCulloch, who is editor of the British Journal of Forensic Psychiatry, to help me. How unusual is it to have a selection of material like this?
Almost without precedent, very rare, and in psychiatric cases, rare.
So how do you approach looking at something like this?
Well, first of all, is to read it in detail and to make notes, and also to look at the background that you already have or what you can get from other sources to see what fits. And then to look at what the content is and what it means, to look at the consistency of what is being said with what you know about the background.
Myra Hindley's words are read by an actress.
I was born on Thursday, July 23rd, 1942. And as I write this, I have just had my 46th birthday, and in less than 2 months' time, I will have spent as long in prison as out of it. So be it. Many people will be surprised to learn that I was born an innocent baby, just like every other baby is.
Even though there are inconsistencies and lies, nevertheless, it's virtually impossible to lie consistently. It has to be a judgment. You can't prove it either way. But certainly from reading it with the background I've got, it would seem that there are some things that come out which look true and which further our knowledge of what was going on.
At the centre of the autobiography lies Myra Hindley's relationship with her father. She hated him and portrayed him as a bully. This relationship appears to have helped mould her into a woman capable of carrying out the Moors murders.
My father wielded total parental control, and I rebelled against it and fought against it, all my life until I was old enough to free myself from it. All his attempts to control me, even the successful ones, were at a great cost, and as a result of bitter recriminations, and often a hard physical punishment.
One phrase that sticks in my mind about him beating her black and blue on the buttocks, and other phrases about him being aggressive, violent to her mother as well. And I think that's extremely important. It's well known that people who've been brutalised either emotionally or physically or sexually or combinations of all three develop abnormal personalities with elements of cruelty and sadism later on.
Myra Hindley was schooled in violence at a young age by her father. Once, when she was being picked on, he locked her out onto the street and told her to beat the bully or face a thrashing herself.
I set off up the street to meet my persecutor, and I quickly concentrated on the things Dad had told me and shown me. As Kenny's hands came up, I shot out my left hand, fist bunched towards his head. As I predicted, both hands went up to protect his face, and I lifted my right hand and slammed it into his tummy, hitting him hard. With a gasp, Kenny Holden's knees crumpled, and before he could recover, I slammed my left fist into the side of his head. Kenny was so totally shocked he sat down heavily on the floor and burst into tears. I stood looking down at him, triumphantly.
The autobiography was written at a time when Myra Hindley was denying all involvement in the Moors murders. This made it difficult for her to address her relationship with Ian Brady. But there is one striking story which reveals how after each murder he liked to take a photograph of the victim's grave. It was Christmas 1960, and they were leaving St. James's Protestant Church in Gorton after midnight mass.
I retained a warm religious glow and came out feeling warmed. Not so Ian, who took a long pull of whiskey and walked across the grass to the edge of a grave, where he casually urinated. I had no idea then that his graves would be marked by photographs and not headstones.
This is the first time Myra Hindley acknowledged that there was a system for marking graves. The way she characterises Brady as the mastermind behind the murders is continued in the 150,000 words she wrote to me years later. She claims he bullied her into abducting the children, and that she was never there when they died. But the pictures I have been given are frequently at odds with Myra Hindley's description of her relationship with Ian Brady. This unique visual record reveals the strength of the bond between them, and in doing so helps explain why the full significance of the photographs has remained hidden until now.
Well, there's an element of play in that he's got his right hand almost round her neck, but she's not distressed, she's leaning towards him, and he's leaning back in order to look at her. So it's playful. Presumably, he got the camera to do that automatically.
Yes, self-timer looks like it's lying on the ground, doesn't it? Because the grass is focused in the foreground.
That's right.
The gun.
That looks almost military, doesn't it?
Is she joined a gun club?
Yes, that's right, to get the guns.
Domestic scene. She's very happy there, doesn't she?
Yeah, another relaxed scene, yes.
The Moores murderers met when Myra Hindley went for interview at a small chemical company called Millward's Merchandise. Ian Brady, who'd been brought up in Glasgow, was working there as a clerk.
Tommy, the boss, wanted to introduce me to his colleagues. He said, "This is Bert. You'll be taking quite a lot of work from him." Then turning to a tall man who was standing at the filing cabinet working, he said, "Myra, this is Ian. Ian, this is Myra."
Ian Brady had already served time in Borstal and prison for theft. He had also earned a reputation for being strange.
One of his nicknames was Lassie, indicating effeminateness. Certainly was bisexual in later life. His other nickname was Dracula, apparently, as a schoolboy. He was interested in pornography. He was cruel. He would torture kittens and see how long they took to die.
Ian Brady introduced Myra Hindley to the writings of the Marquis de Sade, which celebrate sexual sadism. He also played her recordings of Hitler's speeches. These photographs, among those given to me, were shot by Brady as he crouched in front of the television.
Es ist unser Wunsch und Wille, dass dieser Staat und dieses Reich bestehen sollen in den kommenden Jahrtausenden. Wir können glücklich sein zu wissen, dass diese Zukunft restlos uns gehört.
Myra Hindley and Ian Brady became almost inseparable. She called him Neddy, after a character in The Goons. He called her Hess, after Hitler's deputy. They felt their relationship set them apart from the rest of the world.
It was a very strange concatenation of circumstances, and the congruence was the sadistic cruelty. Where they were different was that she was socially very skilled, and he was quite withdrawn. So they're congruent in the middle, as it were, to do with their coolness and sadistic temperament, but complementary in terms of their social abilities.
In her letters, Myra Hindley says Ian Brady prepared her to be his accomplice over a period of 18 months. He first introduced her to the idea of killing with a book. It's divided into 2 sections, Crime of the Century and Trial of the Century. The victim is a child. It even has a character called Myra.
He had given me a book called Compulsion, which was the story of Leopold and Loeb. They decided to commit the perfect murder. They were studying the philosophy of Nietzsche and his theory of the superiority of the pure Aryan and the strong overcoming the weak. It was very much the Nazi philosophy. They kidnapped a 12-year-old boy for a ransom. They killed him, were caught, and sent to prison. I told him it was a very disturbing book, but why exactly had he wanted me to read it? He told me he wanted to do a perfect murder, and I was going to help him. That was why he needed me to pick someone up, because I was a woman, and a child would be more trusting of a woman. I burst into tears, and he slapped my head backwards and forward, and began strangling me. I managed to fight him off, and told him to stop it.
Her protestations are unconvincing in that context. People who are sadistic have masochistic elements to them. They've been brutalised in the past. And I accept there may be a balance here, but on balance the attraction of the relationship is more powerful than being abused. This relationship is very strong. She's happy with this.
I must be totally honest and say he wasn't always cruel and sadistic towards me. We had some pleasant, relaxing times in country places that he'd found in travels on his bike. We'd pack a picnic lunch, flasks of coffee and bottles of wine, and spend whole days in a peace and tranquility that was such a contrast to the other side of him. These were moments I treasured and thought about when things were bad, trying to remember, telling myself that he couldn't help what he was, and maybe in time he would become accustomed to ordinary domesticity, and we could live a normal life.
But any possibility of a normal life disappeared on the 12th of July, 1963, when Myra Hindley picked up 16-year-old Pauline Reed in her van. She tricked her into going to Saddleworth Moor to look for a lost glove. Ian Brady followed on his motorbike. When they got there, he led Pauline onto the moor, raped her and cut her throat. Myra Hindley claimed she was not present during this or any of the other murders.
He led me to her body, which I tried not to look at. I didn't know at the time he was testing me, and that there was no need for me to be there. He told me to look at her. I'll never be able to forget what I saw. I stood and looked at the dark outline of the rocks, against the horizon of the dark sky, and 3 people died that night. Pauline, my soul, and God. No God would let what had happened happen.
Most people, most of the time, in most circumstances like that, would be terribly distressed by this and would suffer nightmares. They wouldn't be able to get it out of their head. They would probably get post-traumatic stress disorder, so-called, in which there's a reminiscence of the visual images you've seen. You can't get it out of your head. You can't control it. She may have had some of that, but it certainly didn't prevail at all.
Compliant in one murder, 4 months later, she helped in another. Like all the killings, it was meticulously planned, carried out, and recorded. 12-year-old John Kilbride was driven to Saddleworth Moor, where he too was raped and murdered. Several weeks later, they returned to his grave, and Ian Brady took a photograph.
He stopped me as I was walking and said to turn round, moved me about a bit, and told me to kneel down and look at Puppet, whose head was showing from where he was still wrapped inside my coat. I now know, and knew quite soon afterwards, that he'd photographed me virtually kneeling on John Kilbride's grave.
Do you believe that?
No, I don't. I think that she didn't know, because I think he rehearsed his intention, his script, if you will, to her endlessly. They spent a lot of time together, not only at work, but of course living together, I think she knew.
How important was the idea of ritual and patterns to Ian Brady in these murders?
With the benefit of hindsight, it looks very important. I'm struck by themes here that the bodies are not to be discovered, but Brady is to know where they are. In the notebook that the police interrogated Brady on, there was a phrase which indicated that he would check whether the site was undisturbed. And I think that's part of ritual, and obsessional, if you will, that the bodies are still there.
The photograph taken on John Kilbride's grave is not a one-off. When the Moors murderers were caught, the police found pictures taken at the grave of Leslie Ann Downey. Keith Bennett died between these two murders. Because of this, I decided to search for any like it among those sent to me. Myra Hindley's description of Keith Bennett's disappearance is the most detailed of all the murders.
I hadn't wanted this to happen. I was tense and terrified, and I tried to concentrate my mind miles away from where I was. Finally, after what I think was roughly half an hour, by which time dusk had begun to descend, I heard him whistle or call. And when I stood up, he was waving me back down to the stream bed. Virtually nothing was said as we made our way back, except for him saying the spade was hampering him and he'd have to hide it, which he did.
Keith Bennett's brother and sisters were at their grandmother's house, waiting for him to join them for the night.
Keith was supposed to follow us up later, but he didn't. There was no, and obviously there's no phones or anything. None of us had phones or anything them days, so we just presumed, or my gran presumed, he'd changed his mind. You know, he decided not to come. And you know, thinking about it now, the horrible thing is that night, you know, we were all safely at Grand, we were all safely tucked up in bed. You know, and obviously, you know, we were all asleep. You know, Keith had already been murdered at that stage. He'd been taken away and been murdered. But I used to talk to him still over night time. You know, how are you, Keith? You know, when you're coming home, you know what's happened to you, and just really, you know, strange things. But it was never ever the same again. You know, I mean, obviously.
In describing the murders, Myra Hindley always claimed she wasn't there when the children died. Distancing herself from their sexual abuse and the act of killing was central to her case for freedom. But she completely failed to provide an account of the murder of Leslie Ann Downey. She was abducted from a fairground and taken back to their house in Hattersley. A tape recording of Myra Hindley shouting at the 10-year-old girl not to spit out a gag was a key piece of evidence in her conviction. I repeatedly pressed her on why she had excluded this from her account.
I'm finding it very, very difficult to do this Leslie Ann Downey thing. I think I'll have to be as brief as possible. There was that tape, which isn't what people think it is, but it's bad enough, and I just hurt so much to think that I could have been such a cruel bastard.
The Moors murderers were caught when Ian Brady made a mistake. He beat 17-year-old Edward Evans to death in front of Myra Hindley's brother-in-law. After the killing, David Smith went to the police.
And the next morning, there was a knock on the back door, and I opened the door. And to cut a long story short, it was a policeman dressed in a baker's uniform with his jacket and hat. It had sunblast on the pocket. And the first thing I said was, "You've got the wrong house. We have mothers of pride."
When the police entered the house, they discovered the body of Edward Evans. Ian Brady was arrested immediately. Over the next 3 days, officers uncovered a large collection of mementos to the murders, and evidence that linked Hindley to them. She was arrested and taken to the cells beneath Hyde Magistrates' Court, where the now infamous arrest photograph was taken. Within 10 days, the police had recovered the bodies of Leslie Ann Downey and John Kilbride. Ian Brady's photographs were central to their search.
My solicitor told me they'd found the body of a child, identified as Leslie Ann Downey. Did I know anything about it? And I said no. I think a week after that, I'm not sure, they found John Kilbride's body. And they charged me with the murder of, I think it was the murder of John Kilbride. Yes, it was. They set me down behind a table, and on the table was a large poster of John Kilbride, and they had this album photographs, and they said to me, will you just identify these pictures or photos, or tell us if you've seen them before? And I looked, and it was a moorland scene. And I couldn't say I hadn't, because I was standing on a rock, and I said yes. And then they turned over the page, and it was horrendous. It was a picture, a photo. And I turned around and looked at him, and he was telling me with his eyes to keep quiet.
What was it like for you and your family during the trial, knowing that these people had probably killed Keith, but there was no connection there? They weren't being tried for it. And so it was, whatever happened, the mystery was to some extent going to remain unresolved.
Well, I think what the main thing was just hoping they would say something. You know, and they would admit, you know, to knowing something about Keith and Pauline. You know, but they never did. No, not till many years later.
The Moors murderers were sentenced to life imprisonment, with the judge recommending that Myra Hindley should not be released for 26 years.
6th of June, 1966. Dear Ma'am, I knew I would have to go to prison for some time for harbouring, but I didn't think it would be for this long. Ian's at Durham Prison on the special wing. Poor thing, he sews mail bags during the day, but he says it helps to pass the time quicker than expected. Will you do one thing for me, ma'am? Take out a policy on or for me for £0.50 a week. I can't even begin to think of the future, but the £0.50 will mount up over the years, and it will be something to fall back on.
Although physically separated, the Moors murderers were to remain emotionally entwined for many years.
Dear Ma'am, Ian's got a little mouse in his cell. He leaves crumbs for it and sits in bed watching it nibble them. The other night he left it half a chip, thinking it wouldn't touch it. But when he woke up the next morning, it had disappeared. 19th of June, 1966. Dear Ma'am, Mr. Fitzpatrick has a list of photos to send to Ian and myself, but he's not sent them yet, probably because the police have still got them. 24th of September 1966. Dear Ma'am, will you phone Mr. Fitzpatrick and tell him as soon as the appeal is over and done with to send Ian and me the photos we picked out at Chester. 17th of October 1967. Dear Ma'am, Mr. F is still trying to have our photos and tapes, etc., returned, and has written to the Director of Public Prosecutions about them. So if he has no luck there either, I've got a list to write to about that. One in particular is an organisation called Justice, which looks into anything that may have been a miscarriage of justice, or if the police have abused their powers. which I am convinced they have when they refuse to return our property to us.
In August 1968, Ian Brady and Myra Hindley's solicitor finally succeeded in getting the Director of Public Prosecutions to hand over all photographs not connected to the known murders. The negatives were sent to Myra Hindley's mother for safekeeping. The letters show that although there were nearly 200 pictures, Ian Brady was desperate to get his hands on just a few of them.
6th of August 1968. Dear Ma'am, I told Neddy you were having those 3 of me developed, and he's pleased, for he feels that you will get them done quicker than his mam. When you've collected them from the chemist, send them to his mam, for I've told her you're seeing to them, and ask her to post them direct to him right away, or send them direct to him.
He writes insistently, not only frequently, but insistently, he must have them. And she writes in her letters to her mum, he won't be satisfied. Please, mother, bring me these pictures. Then he'll stop.
Over the next 3 years, Myra Hindley bombarded her mother with demands for the photographs. All of these letters were read by prison staff who were censoring them, but have not been read for evidence about the murders until now. Over time, their tone becomes increasingly fraught.
11th of January 1970. Dear Ma'am, I want you to tell me what has happened to the slides, for I feel sure there must be something wrong, as it is months and months since I first asked you for them. He keeps asking me why he hasn't received them yet. 3rd of February 1970. Dear Ma'am, you keep saying you'll bring the slides down here with you, and you never do. I keep putting him off with vague excuses, but I think he thinks I haven't asked you for them. And in his last letter he says he will have to send someone round to collect them.
Although the threat worked, and Myra Hindley's mother supplied the copies Brady wanted, she ignored his request to destroy all the originals.
16th of June 1970. Dear Ma'am, thanks for bringing the slides, love. I'm sorry to have nagged about them for so long, but now that you have brought them in, everything is all right.
It's reasonable and sound to conclude that these pictures portray or remind him of special events, and that must be killing and burial sites. And that indeed is the sort of thing that happens with sadists, that they review what they've done, either they remember it in fantasy, and that reinforces them, or they have artifacts, body parts even, hair, souvenirs, pictures, elements of what had happened, through which they're able to relive what had happened. And of course we know that there are pictures extant of at least 2 burial sites with Myra in the picture carrying a dog, holding a dog.
As I'm going through the negatives, I am struck by how similar one of them is to the picture taken on John Kilbride's grave. I tell the police. It turns out they made a full set of prints from the negatives before returning them to Myra Hindley's mother in 1968. Tell me what went through your mind the first time you saw that photograph.
Well, you think John Kilbride. I think anyone who sees it would think John Kilbride.
I am in constant contact with Greater Manchester Police. Investigating the significance of the photographs becomes part of the operation to find the remaining body. 2 undercover detectives come to the BBC to examine the material. They trawl through each of Hindley's letters to her mother and study the photographic negatives. A problem they face in establishing whether the dog picture or any other is a grave marker is that the Moors murderers communicated through messages written in a secret code. These were hidden in letters between them and copied into Myra Hindley's poetry notebooks. Police asked GCHQ and independent codebreakers to help, but although the code is cracked, the messages they find are meaningless to anyone other than the Moors murderers. There's little chance of Ian Brady helping the police, and Myra Hindley is dead. But why did she take the secret to her grave?
She needed to get out. She was really very distressed and upset by being in prison. And to do that, she had to convince people that she was either all right, rehabilitated, or was never there and it wasn't me, as it were. She's got to portray herself differently from the way in which she's being seen.
Myra Hindley worked hard to change the way she was perceived, becoming one of the first prisoners to study for an Open University degree. She also befriended Lord Longford, took up knitting, and learned to play the guitar.
Kilowatt was an aging con of 65 who stood a chance to stay alive and leave the joint and walk the streets again. As the time he was to leave drew near, he suffered all the joy and fear of leaving 35 years in the pen. Then on the day of his release, he was approached by the police, took him to the warden, walking slowly by his side. The warden said, "You won't remain here, but it seems the state retainer claims another 10 years of your life."
This song won a prison arts prize called the Kersler Award.
23rd of January 1977. Dear Ma'am, I'm enclosing £3 with this letter and your birthday card, love. It's part of my Kersler musical prize, and I want to share it with you. Spend it on something nice for yourself. Have your hair done, or get yourself a blouse or something.
But we'll raise the prisons to the ground. Help us raise the prisons to the ground.
Her new image convinced some. In 1977, the BBC screened a programme asking whether Myra Hindley should be paroled. She viewed this as an important moment in her struggle for freedom.
11 years ago, Myra Hindley was found guilty of the murders of 17-year-old Edward Evans and of Leslie Ann Downey, who was 10. Like Ian Brady, with whom she'd stood trial, Hindley was sentenced to imprisonment for life.
Dear Ma'am, I have decided to agree to the BBC programme, as it will deal with the question of parole. There will be 4 people arguing for parole for me, and 4 against.
Yes, well, my impression of Myra Hindley, when I first went, I didn't know what to expect because all I'd read was inflammatory reports in the newspapers. When I met her, she was very different. She was tall, slim, attractive, quietly spoken, sensitive person, reads a lot. And, you know, I don't like this expression, an angel, because, I mean, she's a very nice person at the moment, and I'm certain if she's let out, there's absolutely no risk at all that she'd ever, you know, molest a child in any sense at all.
I had to hear the tapes of my daughter, and I never heard Ian Brady. It was Myra Hindley on that tape with my daughter, not Ian Brady. I had to listen to that and identify the body.
Dear Ma'am, I've just bought myself a caftan, which I saw advertised in the Sunday Times magazine. It's really nice. Indian cotton, lovely and long, with a high neck and nice shaped sleeves. Oriental type. It's comfortable to groove around in after a shower, instead of having to get dressed again.
Myra Hindley continued to deny any involvement in the Moors murders. But in the mid-80s, Ian Brady told a journalist that there were another 2 bodies buried on Saddleworth Moor. The police reopened the case, and this time Myra Hindley decided to begin confessing. The information she provided over months of searching helped locate the body of Pauline Reed. She returned twice to the moor to try and help find Keith Bennett, leading police to the area where he disappeared.
I couldn't live with a burden of guilt anymore. It wasn't just a sudden decision thinking, oh, I better do this and I'll get parole in 1990. On the contrary, I told the police I wasn't applying for parole. It's widely believed that Brady
I confessed because I knew Brady was on the verge of, whereas on the contrary, I confessed and he wouldn't until the July, until after they'd found Pauline Reed, and until he'd seen me on Saddleworth and knew that I was not messing about and I was going to where the areas of the graves were, and that's when the police began to get rambling garbage off him.
He would have kept a very close eye on, through the papers, what was going on with Hindley. So almost perhaps as a retaliation, in order to recoup one's power and omnipotence about knowledge and what had happened, he assists as well.
Brady also returned to the moor. Police notes show he strode rapidly to an elevated outcrop from where he could survey his favourite area of moorland. But then he appeared to become confused. After returning to his cell, Ian Brady showed detectives his collection of pictures taken in the area where Keith Bennett disappeared, images he got from Myra Hindley's mother.
It's just possible, knowing the sorts of temperament of people like this, that Ian Brady was on the moor and checked the site without letting on, as it were. So he's got his last, possibly the last body still in place.
Defeated, the police called the search off.
I would try to deter any would-be well-meaning amateurs coming up here, because what we've done expertly, and it's all been properly logged and recorded. And that's important should we get any further information in the future. To go onto the moor, given the type of terrain, you could damage very easily any grave and it could be lost forever.
In order to understand exactly what the police had done, Keith Bennett's brother, Alan, asked to see their search records. He told me he was astonished at the response.
I was expecting like a map of the area, the gullies, even highlighted or something, you know, just to say done, done, done. When I went back and asked for these plans, he said he didn't have it. Well, there was no such thing. I went to see Peter Topping several times, just to ask him things that, you know, doubts had in my mind at the time, you know, just ask him, you know, if he believes Keith's still there, you know, if he believed, you know, if he had more time, could he have found Keith? He said he believes he's still there to be found. He could have missed him by a couple of feet. I mean, even at one stage he said, you know, someone could stumble across his body. So, you know, I thought, well, I'll make sure it's, you know, if I can, I'll make sure it's someone we know or someone in the family who stumbled over his body.
Over the next few years, Alan and a team of volunteers searched the moorland, digging down to the bedrock, but with no success.
But Brady seemed to think all this was either narrower or wider, you know, than it was when he was here. But I don't think it changed that much.
In desperation, in the mid-1990s, Alan wrote to Myra Hindley and went to see her in prison. She offered to help, but yet again failed to mention that she had supplied pictures to Ian Brady. The priest who took her final confession maintains that Myra Hindley's desire to help was sincere.
I think she genuinely wanted to help find him. She'd met his brother. She was very impressed with his brother. And I think that meeting was the key almost, because I think suddenly she met someone face to face with whom she had created this sort of havoc, you know. I mean, she had destroyed their lives. When she met Alan, then he became real, and he, in a way, brought the reality of what she'd done into her life. And then she wanted to put it right and to find the body, and she worked very hard at it.
Myra Hindley knew that the discovery of Keith Bennett's body would have closed the Moores murder case and made it easier for her to be released. But admitting to hoarding pictures of graves would have undermined her claim that she was bullied into the murders by Ian Brady. When asked to help, she provided maps of the route they took the night Keith died. The forensic archaeologists searching for his body now want to know how these relate to Ian Brady's photographs. A detective from the 80s search has come to show them where they were taken.
I mean, this one, I think it's coming back, walking back down Shiny Cliff. If we're happy that the water is flowing this way, well, which way do you think?
I think it's coming towards us.
I would say going in that direction if we're assuming that the water's coming down this way.
But if the flow was coming away, you wouldn't see that rock. You wouldn't.
You wouldn't see it in this level of water probably anyway, would you? Oh, I see what you mean. Yeah.
Just a thought.
What's that one? Do we know where that one is? Well, we have identified it 13 years ago, John, but today
we'll have to find it again.
Is it that way, do you reckon, or this way?
I think it's that way.
Well, let's just go up to the next corner.
Okay.
When they were trying to work out where Ian Brady had taken his photographs, detectives struggled with those that lacked distinctive background features. These pictures were grouped with images in which the Moors murderers were wearing the same clothes. It was on this basis that they discounted the picture in which Hindley is holding her dog and staring at the ground, a pose similar to one she struck in a photograph known to be a grave marker.
When I first started going to see the police, showing these photographs, I was told they were identified. Every photograph identified as a particular area. I've since found out that they didn't identify the area, they identified what Hindley was wearing. I mean, when I go to the mall, I have a black coat. You know, that I wear when I go to the mall, I don't wear the proof coat. If I was to go to Whaley Bridge or another open area of moorland, I'd wear that coat. You know what I mean? You don't have a you don't have a Whaley Bridge coat, you don't have a Shiny Brook coat. You know what I mean? It's ridiculous. You know, and so they need to start again. Need to get all these photographs again and identify exactly where they're taken. You know, and identify not what she's wearing, what's behind her.
The police have for clues of where Keith Bennett is buried.
Dear Ma'am, will you phone Mr. Fitzpatrick and tell him as soon as the appeal is over and done with to send Ian and me the photos we picked out at Chester? Dear Ma'am, I want you to tell me what has happened to the slides, for I feel sure there must be something wrong, as it is months and months since I first asked you for them. He keeps asking me why he hasn't received them. You keep saying you'll bring the slides down here with you, and you never do. Dear Ma'am, I keep putting him off. Thanks for bringing the slides, love. I'm sorry to have nagged about them for so long, but now that you have brought them in, everything is all right.
The police want to know which pictures were sent to Ian Brady in the hope that they might lead them to the grave of Keith Bennett. Detectives asked if they could have a warrant to search his cell at Ashworth Special Hospital, but government lawyers told them there was a legal problem. The courts had refused a demand by the families to prosecute the Moors murderers for the killings of Pauline Reed and Keith Bennett, ruling it would be a waste of taxpayers' money. Without the prospect of a charge, the police can't get a warrant to search Ian Brady's cell. The Bennett family is furious. Are you frustrated by the fact that the police, if they want to search Ian Brady's cell for those pictures, can't do it?
Yeah, very frustrated. Very angry at times. We're told that Ian Brady's got rights. You know, they can't just go into his cell, his room, to have a look for things that you know may be important to us because of his rights. And you have to ask, what rights has Keith got?
Do you get the feeling that Brady's played the system?
Oh, definitely, yeah. I think he continues to play it as well. I think he will until the day he dies.
Even though the police can't search Ian Brady's cell, there are still clues that could lead them to the grave. Besides hiring image analysts to examine all of Brady's photographs, they're trying to locate where the picture most like a known grave marker was taken. Geologists have told them that the rocks visible behind Myra Hindley only occur on low-lying parts of the moor, like the area where Keith Bennett disappeared. The police have commissioned the analysis of water samples from this area for traces of a decomposing corpse. The forensic archaeologists who carried out the work now want officers to help them dig the moor.
we can certainly use a machine carefully if you get a machine out here, but even just manpower to strip this area and just for once and for all get rid of it. You know, I can't say that enough times.
On the 40th anniversary of Keith Bennett's disappearance, his mother, Winnie Johnson, has come to lay flowers by the moor.
They can find him if they want to, but all they're saying is they want fresh evidence. They've had 40 years of bloody evidence. What more do they want? They don't think what it's doing to me and my family, or other people that are around me. It's me that's being tortured. It's me that's taking it in the back. Nobody else.
The police have spent more than a year working on the evidence that has emerged from Myra Hindley's papers. They refuse to be interviewed on their past performance or the current investigation. No senior officer has given an interview since the last search, which took place in a blaze of publicity almost 20 years ago. The police insist they remain committed to finding Keith Bennett. Until they do so, Ian Brady's former psychiatrist says he will view himself as the victor. It is his perfect murder.
The final control is the possession of the body. The possession of the body.
And as long as that's the case, he can view himself as the winner, even though he's in prison.
Yes, absolutely, yes. I know, you don't know, you want to know, and I'm not going to tell you.